I'm Fionnuala Sweeney in London. Welcome to CNN's International Correspondents, where we examine how the media are covering the big stories. This week, two disasters, different responses. Foreign journalists are restricted from Myanmar as it reels from a deadly cyclone.
Because we understand that the authorities are now looking for me specifically.
And later, China's lessons from the past. We assess how the media has handled this week's earthquake crisis. First, reporting the aftermath and the response to Cyclone Nargis, a disaster that has devastated Myanmar. The ruling junta is refusing to allow international journalists into the country to cover the story. However, some are managing to make their way in. Among them, CNN's Dan Rivers, who travelled to the hardest-hit region of Myanmar, barely evading authorities looking to keep out reporters. He's now out of the country and filed this report.
The furious winds of Cyclone Nargis had ripped apart towns and villages. Tens of thousands were dead and the airport had been shut for 2 days. We were on the first flight in when it reopened and we were shocked at what we saw. Yangon was choked with fallen trees. There were plenty of soldiers, but many seemed to be standing, doing nothing. And then there were the lines for fuel. Finding fuel for our car was also a nightmare. And all the while, we had to be careful we weren't being followed by the authorities. It just goes on and on and on for miles, really. There was limited electricity and communications were fraught, but we were still managing to report on what was happening. We have to change hotels every day. Now my reports were on air, I was a marked man.
We're having to sneak in and out of the hotel through the back stairs, so that they don't know I'm here, because we understand that the authorities are now looking for me specifically. So, it's not coming.
Well, there were two guys basically sitting in a car outside our hotel. Looked like they would have been sitting waiting and watching. It's difficult not to get completely paranoid and ridiculous here, because you kind of feel like everyone is potentially military intelligence and they're all looking for you. We spent more than 8 hours driving to the worst affected area through torrential rain, which was compounding the misery of survivors huddled in the debris of their own homes. The roads are terrible. There are also numerous checkpoints. We're forced to find another way in. We finally managed to get to the heart of the Irrawaddy Delta, where the devastation was appalling. We'd narrowly avoided being arrested, and we were effectively on the run. Well, I almost got caught in the last town. The police had my photo, and they took the rest of my team in and were questioning them and showing them my photo, and they were let go, and I caught up with them afterwards. We then drove down, we hit a checkpoint, we got turned around. We decided basically that we were going to get caught, so we pulled off the road. We've taken a boat up here, and we're now stuck in the middle of the Irrawaddy Delta with about 2 Snickers bars and a jerry can of fuel to last us. We tried to push further into the Delta, but just after this video is shot, we're detained by the police. Somehow we talk our way out and decide it's time for me to leave.
That was Dan Rivers reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to Dan in Bangkok about what it was like working as a foreign journalist inside Myanmar this time around. I asked him how difficult it was compared to the last time he was there.
Fionnuala, this was a nightmare in comparison to my other trips there. We had all sorts of logistical challenges. No electricity across much of Yangon made it very difficult for our equipment to work, first of all. Communications were a nightmare. Most of the phone lines were down. The mobile phone network was down as well, so that made things incredibly difficult. There was no email. There was no fuel as well for our cars to get around. We had to go out and buy fuel on the black market for $15 a gallon, and our poor drivers having to queue up half the night to get fuel. So all those kinds of practical sides of the story were incredibly difficult, as well as the fact that the military junta didn't want us in there, and they were actively trying to stop journalists like me from getting to the story and getting the story out. So it was really, really tough.
Let me ask you, we were referring to you initially when you were in Myanmar this time as CNN correspondent, and then we began naming you. And was it at that point that you became very much a wanted man by the authorities? And in your opinion, would you have preferred not to have been named, or would it have made a difference given that we saw you on camera anyway from there?
I don't think it made a massive difference. They were looking for any foreigners going into the disaster zone anyway, be they aid workers, journalists, or whoever. We took a decision after about 24 hours to name me, to put my face on air, basically because we wanted my reports to have much more impact, so that I could, look down the barrel of the camera and tell people how bad it really was, and show people, lead them through it. And I think the problem with just doing a voiceover over picture, it does tend to wash over people. The viewers at home don't tend to concentrate as much. They see it, they kind of seen it all before. It's difficult to communicate as directly and effectively. If you've got someone standing there in the rubble telling you it's really bad, something needs to be done, it's a much more effective way of getting the story across. And that was a deliberate decision we took. It came with some risks, obviously. It was a fine judgment to make, but I think in hindsight, I don't think we would have done it any differently.
And one of those risks was, of course, as you mentioned in your report, changing hotels every day. Just how close did the authorities get to actually seriously detaining you rather than just questioning you, as it happened a couple of times?
I think we came very close a lot of times. They put out fairly early on a sort of call to all hotels for them to report any foreigners staying with them. As soon as we heard that, we moved. I then didn't actually check into any subsequent hotels. I was forced to sort of sneak in and out the back door and use my colleagues' rooms. And then on the road, on the way down into the Irrawaddy Delta, there were various points, various close scrapes we had where my crew was taken in a question and I was in hiding somewhere else and having to hide under a blanket in the back of the car at checkpoints. I mean, it got almost quite ridiculous at some points, but always at the back of my mind were, there were some serious risks involved with all this, not only to me and the Western crew that we had there, but more so to the local staff that we were using. I mean, these local Burmese people who were helping us, fixers and producers, really putting their life really on the line to get the story out. And it must be said, all of us have to salute them for their courage and bravery in willing to go to those lengths.
Burma is a country, Myanmar, which